we go to number 18, which is in the same verse, Matthew 23, verse 3 and 4. The religion scholars and Pharisees are competent teachers in God's law, but no, you won't go wrong in following their teachings, but be careful about following them. They don't live what they preach. So this is the thing. The 18th point is from the same thing. They preach things without practicing it first. See, Matthew 23 verse 3 is the opposite of Acts 1:1. Please remember these two opposites. Matthew 23, they preach, but they don't do. Acts 1:1, it says Jesus did and then preached. Do you get it? These are two opposites. And with these two opposites, you find how to build Babylon, how to build Jerusalem. Babylon is the false counterfeit church. And Babylon is built by a whole lot of preachers who live in Matthew 23 verse 3. They preach, but they don't do it in their life. They preach and they tell people all types of things, but they don't do it in their life. Whereas Jesus, He did not preach and then practice. No. There's a saying, practice what you preach. Sounds nice. Good. But Jesus did something better. He preached what He had already practiced. He didn't first preach and then practice it later on. He practiced it first and then preached it. He never preached what He had not practiced. How long do you think Jesus took to prepare the Sermon on the Mount? You know, people ask, how long does it take to prepare a good sermon? How long do you think the Matthew chapter 5, 6 and 7 is the finest sermon that anybody's ever preached? How long do you think Jesus took to prepare that sermon? Half an hour? 1 day? No, 30 years. A good sermon takes 30 years to prepare. You can't just listen to a tape and preach a sermon. That's knowledge. But if you want to speak like Jesus spoke, you got to live it. People have asked me, Brother Zach, can I preach your sermon? I say, sure. If you live it first, you can go ahead and preach it. Because once you live it, it's not my sermon, it's yours. If you preach it without living it, you're just seeking honor. That's all. And that'll kill you. You belong to those people of whom God said in Jeremiah 23, I hate those prophets who steal my words from one another. So, you got to live it. The word has to become flesh in you. Then you can speak it. You must ask God. That's what I did 30 years ago. And God's helped me through the years to try and keep that. Lord, let me never preach in my life what I have not practiced. I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard me preach that you must go to North India and be a missionary? You think North India doesn't need missionaries? They need thousands of missionaries. Why haven't you heard me preach it? Not because it's not needed. I'll tell you, it's greatly needed. I do not have the authority to preach on that subject. And you know why? I've not lived there. Most of the missionary societies in India, listen carefully, even the evangelical missionary societies in India, their leaders all live in South India, educate their children in good schools and colleges in South India, and tell other people to go into those remote villages of North India and preach, and to send their children to boarding schools or something like that. I'm not here to judge them. God is their judge. All I say is I will not follow that example. I would be a Pharisee if I followed that example, because I cannot preach what I have not done. The person who has lived in North India and who has brought up his children in those difficult circumstances, that person can tell other people to do it, not otherwise. The rest are all Pharisees. The same principle applies to many other things. Don't ever try to speak on something which you have not done. Don't try and tell people who got teenage children how to bring up their teenage children if you have never had, if your children are not yet in teenage. It's like a bachelor telling people how to bring up their children. I've seen people who got children, but they haven't come to teenage years, but they're telling other people how to bring up their teenage children. If you don't have married children, please don't talk to other people who got married children. You know zero about them. Just keep your big mouth shut, and you'll be a blessing in the church. But do you know the number of people who are Pharisees in the church, who are experts on giving advice to all types of people? Areas they have never done a single thing in. What advice can you give? The advice of a Pharisee. They preach, but they don't do it, or they haven't done it yet. Why not be patient and wait so that you can speak with authority? And because you've done it first. You brought up your children right, speak on it. You haven't done it, leave that subject out. Speak on all the other subjects. How can you teach chemistry when you haven't studied chemistry? I mean, people in the school know that. Why can't we know it in the church? They won't appoint an English teacher to teach chemistry. You got a degree in English, you can't teach chemistry. Leave somebody else to do that. Chemistry needs to be taught, but you're not the person. You got a degree in English, teach English. This is so simple. Atheists in school know it, but elder brothers in our churches don't know it. That is how Phariseeism infiltrates our churches. When we speak what we have not